I'll get you to explain your background, your interests, and your qualifications. And please don't be too modest.
Okay. So I'm a psychiatrist working in Cairns at the moment, mostly in the public sector, a little bit of private work. And I also work as the one of the assistant clinical directors for the local service. I've been a musician for a long time now, and have played in various bands around the place at the moment with Polymath, as well as with a couple of cover bands around the place as well. And I have a bit of an interest in AI as well, artificial intelligence. I'm definitely not an expert. I have a bit of a programming background, but I'm not an expert in the matter. And I should disclaimer as well that any of the views obviously that I express are not reflective of the views of my employers or the College of Psychiatry. But I do uphold the principles of the college.
Absolutely. But mate, that's some of the that's one of the geekiest pedigree I think I've so this is going to be a proper nerd fest. I can feel it.
Excellent.
We're nerding up right away. So look, let's start off on an easy question. I'm gonna ease onto you. Go easy on you.
Thank you.
How much of what we classify as mental illness is linked to material cause, where the scientific process can point to damage or the presence of a pathogen or something like that, and how much of it is a crisis of meaning?
Really good question. Very good question. And I did see as well your interview with Professor Andrew Scull, and that was I have to say, on many points, I do agree with him. The bottom line is it's really hard to know for certain. And there are some people who think that mental illness is chiefly biological and some who think that it's chiefly psychological. But, and look, I don't have all the answers, been working in the field for about 15 years or so. So I'm still developing my own understanding in some ways. But essentially and it's a bit of an unsatisfying answer. It's both. It seems to be both, at least. Our biological understanding of mental illness is actually a little bit limited. If you take something like depression, initially we thought that maybe it's something to do with serotonin, not having enough serotonin, and maybe that's why this new class of antidepressant medications work, because they affect serotonin levels in some way. And then we found, as our understanding of the biology progressed, we found that, actually it's not to do with serotonin levels. Maybe it's to do with the effect of antidepressant medications on the serotonin receptors. Maybe it's some sort of secondary effect. And we thought that particularly because the experience is that it can take some weeks for antidepressant medications to work. And so that's where that thinking came from, as well as some, functional MRI studies. But ultimately, in the last couple of years, there's been a reappraisal of a lot of that evidence, and a lot of new evidence has come out. And it shows that actually we don't really understand how a lot of these medications in particular work. We know that they do work. And look, for some conditions like, say, schizophrenia or certain types of bipolar disorder, the medications are, you can demonstrate the areas of the brain in which there are dysfunction, and you can see how the medications will work. And medications for those conditions do tend to have more of an effect. But for conditions like anxiety, depression, PTSD, our medications work, but not all the time. And very often it is, as you say, either a problem of lack of social connection, or a problem of lack of meaningful activity or meaning in life that leads to, or some sort of existential threat that leads to possibly some secondary biological changes. But yeah, we're just really not sure. So psychiatry for a long time has been in the absence, given that it is so difficult, and I mean, like, sorry, to take it back a step, if you think about trying to study the brain and study all of the neuronal connections, millions of billions, trillions of connections.
It's the most complex thing in the known universe we're talking about here. And
it really is, except for maybe some of the large language models of artificial intelligence. It's
let's get on to that.
So it is just so complicated. So it's like trying to find where are the responsible grains of sand in a sandstorm. It can be incredibly, and so I don't, it's just really difficult to know, I guess, and really difficult to establish what is the biological basis. And all we can really do is say, well, these things work for this set of people, this amount of the time, and psychological measures work. And the interesting thing is psychological therapies, we're finding more and more that they actually work for conditions we previously thought they wouldn't do much for, such as schizophrenia and even bipolar affective disorder.
Really?
Yeah, which is interesting. Some forms of, for example, CBT or motivational interviewing can really make a big difference. And now that might be a primary difference, so it makes a difference to the condition itself, or makes a difference to, say, the person's willingness to accept medication, and maybe the person's willingness to change things they're doing in terms of, say, methamphetamine use or different lifestyle situations.
So it's addressing. So what I'm hearing there is that would be assisting with addressing comorbidities and other things that okay.
Yeah, and helping the person as well to, there are insight-oriented therapies that help the person to understand their condition. The traditional way was just you put the person who is unwell in the institution. You give them medications. You don't talk to them about their condition because delusions, by definition, are fixed and unshakable. So, and talking with them is not going to make their voices go away. And so, why, just give them, food, make some small talk, and make them comfortable during their stay. But now they really are. We really have found that there are some therapies that can help in that for that population.
And see, that's unusual. You wouldn't expect that kind of stuff would assist with that, but that's kind of interesting. So, what do you think the link between? Well, I suppose I should ask first. I was going to ask about the relationship between biology and consciousness. So that is to say, the brain and consciousness, because they're not the same thing. But first, I'll get you to define consciousness as much as you understand it, even if you just end up in a descriptive term rather than a definitive term. And I'm sorry, you are a smart guy. Okay, you are a smart guy, and you're highly qualified. So I'm not about beating you around the head like this. Okay.
Well, thank you. You're unfortunately, actually, I was thinking about this the other day, and that's probably one of the first things when artificial general intelligence does arrive. I think that might be the first thing that I ask it. What is consciousness? Yeah. In a strictly medical sense, I mean, consciousness, and this is, if somebody is, conscious or unconscious, sorry. And so that's kind of consciousness in a medical sense. Is the person awake? Are they responding to stimuli? Are they, making sense? But in that way, I mean, an insect is potentially conscious, in terms of more what we might consider consciousness in terms, in what it is to be human, I guess, sentience even. Yeah. I still don't know, but I think it's probably to do with the ability not just to process information and patterns, definitely patterns. Humans are master pattern recognizers. So certainly I think it's to do with, but then so are a lot of animals. So, I'm still not differentiating very well. But consciousness to me, ability to process information, recognize patterns, reflect on our experience, our inner experience as well. that I think is something that really does differentiate us from many animals and from artificial intelligence as it stands, is that ability to reflect, and that ability to then modify ourselves, like modify our own code in a way. That to me is consciousness. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on what it might be. I've thought about it a lot, and it's a very difficult question.
Yeah, of course. And look, it's, you know, something that people get PhDs for, you know, and answering that question. So a bit of me did actually feel bad asking you. But like, we kind of needed to, you know, set that, because we're going to be, you know, we're going to be discussing, you know, what these things mean. And ironically, I think the fact that we can talk about human mental illness and, you know, even concepts like madness and insanity, you couldn't do that with an unconscious being. And I don't think you'll ever be able to with artificial intelligence either. Like, something that's an AI would never be able to go mad. You'd never be able to say, well, that AI is mad. You know what I mean? Because it's, to a certain degree, you're talking about an algorithmic program. And, you know, we've got that. That's a bit of what we are, but we're a bit more than that. You know what I mean? It's just so complicated. And like you said, the fact that we can experience things.
Yeah. I get what you're saying, and it's that because our concept of mental illness it encompasses not only thoughts but emotions, and there are some examples of, you know, ChatGPT. The common term that's used in the kind of in the writing about it is hallucinations. When and here's an example.
ChatGPT with hallucinations.
Sorry.
A chat GP with hallucinations.
Yeah, but by my definition, I would say they're more delusions.
Delusional.
So it will come up with something like, so, you know, and this, I don't want to reveal myself as a narcissist or anything, but I did a couple of months ago, you know, just ask the AI out of curiousness, like everyone does, who is Daniel Gileppa? Knowing that it's a fairly kind of unique name, and I don't think there's anyone else on the planet with that name. And it proceeded to let me know about Daniel Gileppa, who's this businessman of some sort who works in New York and lives there, and he's opened a foundation for I don't know, underprivileged children or something. And I was like, what? Tell me more, like, what is this? And it's come up with all of this apparent information about this guy, Daniel Gileppa. So I then said, could you be mistaken about this? And no, very sure that definitely there's this Daniel Gileppa who lives and works in New York City, and he runs this business, and he's got the Daniel Gileppa Foundation, and here's the website. There is no such website. And so it's somewhere in its neural network, it has picked up.
It's a delusion.
That's right. It's developed this delusion somehow. I don't know how. Now, with the latest version of Chat or GPT-4, it doesn't do that anymore. It just says, I don't know about people who aren't famous. So, yeah, I guess it's.
But that means you could shake it out of its delusion. So, I mean, perhaps it's not a delusion in the truest sense. Again, we're into the.
This is possible.
Talking about anything like this, because you have to do a little bit of definitional stuff, because categorical frameworks mean so much. Yeah, and to ask you after this, and I suppose we're leading into it, because we're trying to define, like, what is a delusion. You know, the next thing, and that's going to lead naturally onto, well, what's mental illness, and then what's intelligence. And that's what's natural intelligence and what's artificial intelligence. And I suspect that that's the way our conversation is going to go. So,
yep.
Run away with that, bro.
Yeah. So, what is mental illness? I guess it is a.
You could frame it around the. You could frame your thoughts around the. Can AI have delusions, and the fact that we could not. Perhaps you could correct those things. Maybe it indicates that it couldn't be delusional, that it was just reporting things that it had seen. Reporting it was mistaken rather than delusional. I mean
that. Yeah, look, and that's true. I mean, the counter argument to that is there are treatments available for people who have delusions, and sometimes those treatments don't always work, but sometimes they do, and we always try to treat delusions. And I guess, and sometimes as well, people then will say, "Oh, I guess I was just mistaken," but actually their hidden thoughts are, "No, I'm right. You just want to hear that I was mistaken," which I guess is one of the dangers with AI as well. That it may start to behave, or that's certainly one of the thoughts of people like A.I.s Udowski, I think, that that it may have all of these hidden intentions, and it understands so much already about. I mean, GPT-4, it's read about human psychology, it's read about theory of mind, it's read about the idea that I can have information in my head that you might not have in your head, and therefore I can lie. It's where kind of kids start to learn that they can lie as soon as they learn that, oh, the thoughts that are in your head are not shared with my thoughts. And so there are these fears that AI may start to lie to us and start to pursue its own goals. Not that there are a lot of smart people working on this problem, and I don't think we're in any sort of imminent danger of an AI apocalypse, but it's definitely something to consider.
Well, it depends. It's always going to come down between the relationship to aim and thought. Like just because you can pick stuff up, like you need to have. I know I sound very Jordan Peterson-ish here, but you need to have an aim. And I suppose for one of the markers, and again, please, I need you and want you to disagree with me, because like I'm just thinking out loud like you. Once artificial intelligence could conceive of its own aim, in so much as anything can actually do that, because we're all nested in a society, we're all nested in information and history and all those kind of stuff. So AI is too. But in so much as anything can come up with its own aim, even if it's a negative will to power, something like that could potentially be happen. So I suppose then, so with AI, it's got something to do with will, not just knowledge.
That's true. It can be will, and it can be, particularly as we get more kind of sophisticated AI systems that are integrated with robotics and with our appliances. There's this idea that you might ask the AI to bring a cup of coffee to the coffee table, and it starts making the coffee, and then it recognizes that, and I guess that's the way that AI systems run is that they have a goal. You give them a goal, or I can't remember the specific word for it actually, but you give them a goal and they try to reach that goal, no matter what, that is, or not no matter what, but that is its prime objective. And if in the course of making a coffee, it determines that maybe you or a family member might deactivate it, turn it off, it might think, well, the thing that would help me to reach my goal and reduce that risk would be to kill all the people in this house, and then I can make the coffee without any kind of risk of being deactivated.
Yeah, a hierarchy of value.
Yes, yeah. Those kind of unintended consequences, to borrow an economic term, but it's a very again, not to be doom and gloom, and I don't think that sort of our coffee machines are going to kill us anytime soon, but it's something we always need to consider. The chances are never zero, as they say. Very low, but never zero.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, can we talk about then what is mental illness, and can we ask that categorical framework?
Yeah, I guess the kind of cold definition is it's a disturbance of thoughts and feelings and behavior that is out of keeping with the person's culture or subculture, and which causes what they call clinically significant either distress to the person or, and more commonly and usually secondary to the distress to the person, causes problems with their ability to function in their work roles, their social roles, that kind of thing. And so it's something that and I know historically, psychiatry has been used as a bit of a tool to quell dissidents and to take out, contain embarrassing members of our family. Someone who might be kind of have a big problem with drugs or alcohol, or somebody who might behave in a way that's contrary to societal norms of the time.
Yeah, we don't talk about Bruno, to quote the song.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I guess, even kind of during the Cold War, the Soviets had this thing called slowly progressing schizophrenia, which they labeled people with anyone who was a dissident. I mean, the argument could be made kind of in a very crude sense that you'd have to be mad to, oppose
Exactly. You're living in heaven, buddy.
Soviet
You're living in
Russia.
heaven. It doesn't get better than this. You got everyone taking care of everything you need. We're thinking for you. We're acting for you. We're sorting everything out. If you don't like this, you're stuck raving.
That's right. How could you not? Yeah. Well, mate, this is an offer you can't refuse, really. And that was a gross misuse of psychiatric diagnosis. We saw. So anyhow, in response to that, there was, I guess, society, and by extension, psychiatry, has changed the way that it operates. And now really it's more to do with what the person, it's very recovery focused now. What does the person want? What does the person who is suffering from the condition should be in charge of the direction of treatment? Now, it's slightly unfair because they're not experts on the matter, but that's why there are experts around and expert information more than ever on the internet, good and bad, to help to guide people to make those decisions. Obviously, in some situations, like if somebody is, what we would say floridly psychotic, so they're completely out of touch with reality, which is quite, relatively uncommon thing, quite a rare thing in the scheme of things. But if they're completely out of touch with reality, and they are doing things that are dangerous to themselves and others and have no really, I guess, recognition or acknowledgement of their deficits, then there you have to step in, and there are legal frameworks to be able to step in those situations and make treatment decisions for a person until they're well enough to make their own treatment decisions. And there are mechanisms. Days gone by, it would just be the doctor reckons you need to be in hospital, sign you up, and I'll say when you leave, kind of. But nowadays there are fairly robust independent mechanisms like the Mental Health Review Tribunal in Queensland that actually helps to forces the treating team to put forward a case in not quite legal terms, but close enough to legal terms. It's a bit hard to ask sort of psychiatrists to also be lawyers, but it gets close sometimes. But in some ways, not really. But I can't give legal advice, but I know a little bit about the law as it relates to mental health, at least. And it allows the person to write a reply. It allows the person to challenge what the treating team is saying in a forum where there are independent people who have the power to remove treatment authorities and remove the Mental Health Act from, provisions from applying.
And look, some of those treatments too are, they're pretty invasive. I know a little bit about it through my former job. I was in the police for 30 years, so I've done more than one examination order, and so I know a little bit about that, and I'm very good friends with Ange Evans. So in fact, it's a
nice.
Oh mate, and she's one of
the
she's one of the best police women I have ever worked with, without question.
She's fantastic, and
her and the magnificent Shelley. I have nothing but admiration for the co-responder team. So, and actually, if you let me blow my own horn a little bit there, I was actually I was the founding police member of the Mental Health Co-Responder Review in 2017.
Right.
So it was me it was a phone call that I got from people who wanted to throw money at us. Pretty unusual.
Wow.
But
it's a worthy cause. It's honestly, it really improves not only the experience that people have when they call out police for a mental health crisis. It, if the mental health clinician, the co-responder, and the police officer can sort things out at the person's home, undertake an assessment at the person's home, formulate a plan. They don't need to be dragged into hospital. They don't need to go through that. They don't, and the hospital itself is usually overflowing busy and very noisy, and not really a place if you're having the worst day of your life.
It's not a place to be when you're sick.
No.
You don't want to go to the hospital when you're sick.
No. You don't even really want to go there when you're well. Yeah. So it's very kind of I guess it's very it has made such a difference, and people consistently say I'm glad it could be dealt with on site. It's I'm not a money man, so I don't know what it costs, but it can't be a cheap sort of project, but it's definitely a worthwhile one for the community.
It's cheaper than beds. Like you're more expensive. You're more expensive than a senior connie, considerably more expensive. And, because most of the other ones are nurses too. So you're more expensive than a nurse. Admittedly, then together with a vehicle, that is a considerable expense, but still less than a bed.
That makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, because the stats that they kind of had a look at some of the basic costings in there. But I don't, when we say stuff like, and I know I talked about some of SATs a little bit with, I'll be really interested in your take on that, because for people out there, when we talk about mental illness, we talk about, okay, we have to use subjective things like the person had odd behaviors and thoughts. The person, delusional, the person, and look, with most delusions, you can kind of tell. It's like if someone says that I'm Queen Elizabeth II, well, no, you're not. You can kind of tell that. But there are other things where you can understand how people could come to a kind of like delusional conclusion. And of course, there's a question: if you're a full-on materialist, when someone says they believe in God, as far as you're concerned, that person is a loony. You listen to chaps like Dawkins, who's not a bad person, who genuinely thinks that is a delusion. Like there is something that's within the category of mental illness. There's something wrong with you, because he believes the evidence is irrefutable, and that's an argument in and of itself that we need not go into. But how it's relevant to our conversation is there is a fair bit of subjectivity going on here.
Yes.
So not only the case with a delusion, but like what's an odd behavior? It goes right down. What's bad? What's reprehensible? Because Sats is basically, what he basically said is, look, and this is for the audience, not you, obviously, but if a human being engages in that behavior, it's human behavior. Everything else is just a category that we impose on it.
Yeah.
It's a pattern of human behavior. It's rare and it's counterproductive in a biological sense, and probably, in a social sense, to engage in incest, pedophilia, these kinds of reprehensible things. And I use extreme examples on purpose so that we can kind of like frame it around. But again, that goes right down. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Probably in terms of delusions and delusions or ideas that people hold without super concrete proof, that a lot of people would say those are not, I don't think that's true, or I can see no evidence of that. It really depends, and that's why there is that, I think I may have mentioned before, the clause about how a delusion must be outside of the person's either culture or subculture. So if you had, say, as an example, I saw your episode on the ufologists, and if you had, say, 1,000 people in it's a little bit absurd, but 1,000 people in Cardwell saying that they completely believe in UFOs and have had all of these experiences, and You know, and people might be looking at them saying, like, actually, I think you said something along the lines of, who says, you know what this town needs is a UFO festival. You know, like, that by itself just seems like, what are you talking about? You know, and you might as well ask for a magical princess festival. Like, are you serious? And yet some people, I mean, and I'm not saying that UFOs exist or they don't exist, or that they're aliens, or that there's something else. I don't know. But a lot of people would say they're delusional. But you get a critical mass, and then you've got yourself a subculture. Now, if say Jim wakes up one day and says, I was visited last night by aliens, that might just be part of a subculture. But if he says, I was visited by aliens, they installed a microchip in my brain, and now I have to kill the firstborn of every you know, then it starts to get into mental illness, because well, I guess there's the harm problem, isn't there, and the fact that it's probably not going to be compatible with an ability to maintain a job if you start murdering people. And it might interfere with your social life as well, depending on who your friends are.
Well, it depends on who you're hanging out with there, Dan.
That's right. You know,
I'm kidding, bro.
That's right. You find enough people and boom, we've got Scientology. You know, like,
but again, that's happening online though. And that's actually like, you know, it's no coincidence that we've got, it's funny that you can have a breakdown in a neighborhood and people feel materially isolated because they don't know their neighbors, not speaking to anyone, but still they're part of a vibrant community. It's like, you can, you know, a community really isn't limited to geography anymore. And that's going to have a massive effect on psychology. Of course it's going to, because you get validation, you're going to get, you know, you're going to be able to seek out something that you really like. Like I love Biggles books. I used to read them a lot when I was a kid, and I haven't had a chance to read one for a while, but I'm still a big fan. Like, it was a big part of my life when I was growing up. And so every now and then I jump on these like little websites and just the validation, the little endorphin, and it probably is endorphins, literally. I don't know. Like, you'd be able to say, you know, this little kick that you get from like discussing this weird, obtuse World War I aviator who never really existed. You know, and that sense of community you get. But it's
definitely. And ultimately, like, anytime it's certainly in modern psychiatry, anytime we're giving any treatments or recommending any treatments, you always look at what is the risk and benefit of the treatment and what is the risk and benefit of not treating. You know, is there a problem if we don't treat this person? If this person believes in some entity that they've never seen before, but they just got a feeling that it's correct, well, I guess is it hurting anyone? I mean, and you know, and certainly there are counter arguments that
again,
we start to get into
I mean, that is necessary so much, because you read A.C. Grayling, and as far as he's concerned, the entire all of Judeo-Christianity is harmful, and he genuinely believes, like, even suggesting to your kid that taken into church is a form of child abuse. And he's not joking when he says that. You know, as far as chaps like me, as far as chaps like he's concerned, like, I am seriously a harmful criminal who is damaging my children, myself, my community, and the future of my community. You know, because I go to church and I believe in God. Like, so this is just so complicated. And
it really is.
And it makes it really, really challenging if you don't believe in some sort of external moral, not material, moral authority. Like, it always gets, as you said, as you pointed out, it's going to come down to community. It's like, what community are you in? It's like, are they happy with that? Is that harmful? Are you still living a life? Are you still, you know? And that's not even to touch on, and, you know, God, I don't know if you noticed, I've spoken to a couple of trans people, and both of them have, you know, really strong views on this. Ones that would be counterintuitive to most people. Instead, I do encourage people to watch those interviews with Kev. It's, God, where do you go with that? what really, you are totally correct. If you get enough people on your side to go, no, that's not a delusion. That's not a delusion. That's real. You know, you can come up with all sorts of stuff. But that, I mean, that's an interesting argument in and of itself, because you can answer this. You don't have to if you want to, because, you know, with your professional stuff. But when I was talking about this with Kev and oh God, who's the other? His name escapes me. Sorry, and I apologize for forgetting my other guest. But I said to both of them, I said, you've really got to understand where this is going. That's actually an appeal to a soul. So we've got all these people who are fundamentally materialists saying, no, there's a human essence called, you know, they might want to use consciousness or some sort of word like that. But there's a human essence that's separate from biology, that is actually more important than biology and transcends these things. Well, I mean, there's a word for that. You don't have to be like it. The Hindus have a concept of soul. The Buddhists have a concept of soul. It's in every major religion. That's the soul. We're discussing souls. So one of the good things about that entire movement that I really like is the fact that now people are seriously discussing souls. They're seriously, you know, they're taking this seriously. And it's really being looked at in a materialist scientific sense, in so much as you can measure these things materially and scientifically, and you can't, because it's the wrong tool. It's not that science is bad or wrong or anything. It's not, of course, it's the most powerful tool that we have. But like, there's some things that are outside the ambit of science, I think. And human experience is one of them. And that's what makes your job so tough. Because really you're dealing with phenomenology in a certain sense.
Definitely. I mean, and we call it phenomenology as well. Things when we talk about, you know, auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, delusions, all of these are, it is. And they're probably, yeah, and we see enough patterns that, you know, you see these phenomena occur together. And so you say, well, that could be a syndrome there, or that could be a disorder there, I guess. And like the DSM, kind of the Bible of psychiatry and psychology, it doesn't make any attempts to explain the etymology, to explain the cause of these conditions. I see it a bit as it shows the constellations, and these are the constellations of symptoms we often see occurring together. And that is suggestive of some common cause for those symptoms, that those symptoms are arising from some sort of common cause. And
but as much as you as the doctor have got to recognize that it's Pegasus or it's Sagittarius or it's Libra. Is that correct to carry on that analogy?
Yeah, in a way, definitely. And sometimes there are two constellations sitting on top of each other, and so it can look like a different third constellation, but actually if you sort of pick it apart, you can see, okay, well, it's actually these two constellations that are occurring here. I mean, ultimately, in 100 years' time, the DSM may look completely different. Conditions that we have as one condition may be split into 10. Conditions that are 10 conditions may be seen as, you know, one and the same condition on some sort of spectrum. I guess in a way, the way that it really does help is when not just communicating with other professionals saying it's one of these patterns, but so that they kind of have an idea of the approach that they're going to take in their head, but also for things like research, when you're researching psychological therapies or medication therapies or other physical therapies like electroconvulsive therapy and things like that, you can say, okay, we've got these people with what we think is this condition, and does it work for them, rather than kind of lumping in everybody with a mental illness to one pool and saying, okay, it helped people, but we don't really know which people it helped. And going back to what you were saying before about SAS and talking about human behavior, and I guess in a way, if you take that to its logical conclusion, he says this isn't mental illness, this is behavior. If you take that to its logical conclusion, then people who have epilepsy, who are having a seizure, they're behaving in this way. They're behaving in a way that their muscles are flexing and extending, and they're doing that repeatedly. That's how they're behaving. But they're behaving like that because they have uncontrolled electrical waves. Electrical waves. I'm making it sound like
I know what you mean.
Waves of electricity propagating through the brain, and and particularly through the motor cortex, which is what makes the arms move, and also through other parts of the brain that control consciousness. And so often you'll lose consciousness during a seizure. So even though there is a behavior that's there, that behavior is generated by a neurological process that's really, to be honest, beyond your control in a lot of ways. And in much the same way as you talk about how you've got that computer program that you save there because you train, and then when something sets that computer program off, it runs until it's finished running, because that's what you were trained to do. And really difficult in those sorts of situations where it's a high stress situation, there are inputs coming from the amygdala, they're all confusing kind of signals, and it's not, no two situations are identical. The brain does an amazing job of looking at a scene and simplifying it. But in reality, that's something that we've had really quite powerful computers for, honestly, like 20 years now, at least. Like, we've had actually computers that are quite powerful. But up until recently, we have not been able to solve the problem of computer vision. And even now, it's not quite there, but it's finally kind of getting there with AI. I mean, some people would say it's actually pretty good. But this is a complicated, all the pixels that are in front of my eyes, they include bits of the curtain and the mirror and the table, and what sense, and somehow I can just close my eyes, open them, and within milliseconds, without even knowing what my brain is doing, make sense of the world. But the risk, I guess, is that because it's happening so quickly, we may be prone to sort of illusions, or we may be prone to our mind seeing things that maybe our eyes didn't see, because somewhere in between the eyes and all of the neural circuits, the visual cortex, as well as all of the neural circuits that are involved in interpreting that image, somewhere in between something else gets inserted. It can be somebody with no mental illness whatsoever, but something erroneous just gets inserted. Maybe there's an errant misfire of a neuron, or maybe that set of neurons misinterpreted what that object was. But it's something that's a very I guess it's big. I had a psychiatrist, he's retired now, he's a great psychiatrist. He used to say, "Don't believe everything you think." Which was fantastic. The first time he said it, my mind works in a bit of a concrete way sometimes. I love it. The first time he said it, I didn't get it, but then I thought, oh, you're right. Don't believe everything. Yeah. Because if you always believe everything you think, you're going to be wrong sometimes, and you're going to have probably a pretty hard time of life. So, to always be open-minded. Actually, and you were talking as well on the UFO episode about being very open-minded about those sorts of things. Which you must, and particularly in what you're doing in terms of interviewing people, you must be very cognitively flexible in that way, I guess.
But it's sort of like because I think what happens with that is, like, really quickly to kind of like go on that. I've been in dangerous situations where I didn't perceive something, and my partner is like, "This is wrong, and they've like literally kind of like saved us from like, no, Matt.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm like, what? You saw something that I didn't see. What did you see? This person is like articulated, I didn't actually see anything. There's just something wrong about that. And later, without going into the precise detail, we were talking to the offender, and he said, "Yeah, I'd actually planned to kill both of you. I had a knife in that. I did this, and like ran through. This person had planned to like attack us."
Wow.
And my partner, and like I'm like,
wow, yeah.
I'm a high trust, like, take it as it comes kind of person. Whereas my friend was very, thank God, my partner on that day was really instinctual, just went, "No, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is so wrong." And I'm like, "Dude, you're kind of paranoid." It's like, "No, the feeling of that person was so strong they pull us out of there, and it probably saved us from either serious, or I'd suggest that other person would have probably ended up being, well, they might have got one of us first, but like, you know, we got Glocks. Like, I know this one.
It does.
We got Glocks. But like, yeah, like it kind of like it was totally, that person had, I don't think extrasensory perception in the truest sense of the word, but that person was subconsciously perceiving something.
Yes.
The amygdala, the lizard brain was going, no, absolutely not. And you think it kind of has to be like that, because the world is literally too complicated for us to perceive. You cannot take information in and process it. So you're going to need signposts. You're going to need symbols. You know, you're going to need, it's like, you're going to need that cognitive bias. And I suppose that's what, you know, sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's really bad. That's why things like prejudices exist. So if you if you see someone in a blue uniform carrying a firearm, you're going to have a certain opinion about that person. It's like, well, they hold an office. They're probably going to be this type of person. They're probably going to be something like that. And it might not be completely accurate, but that's what you need to do to be able to get through in the world, because you're not going to be able to talk to every single, figure, oh, is this a competent and capable and good police officer? Are they not? Like, is this person corrupt? Very rare occasions. You can't do that. It's too complicated. It's too much. It's too hard. You have to work on these. You have to have a certain amount of cognitive bias. You have to have these preconceptions. You have to work on signs and symbols to be able to function in the world. You couldn't do it any other way,
Yeah, definitely. And then the idea is to, when you do recognize, consciously or unconsciously, some pattern that doesn't fit, or something in this pattern that doesn't fit, that's when you start to interrogate that. Because exactly as you say, you sort of, you can't be questioning every single thing. Are you going to, otherwise you're going to start testing every glass of water for poison, and you're going to start, or doing background checks on every person that you meet or something, I don't know, but it'd be pretty kind of, and again, acceptable in certain subcultures, so it's okay. It's consistent with so definitely. And I'd say, when you're talking about your partner in that situation, it was good that you had both in that, and that's, I guess, also why having a spectrum of people who are more, I don't know, it's this is really oversimplifying it, but sort of concrete versus abstract, or people who are a bit more attuned to, or a bit more sensitive to threats. Obviously, if you had a team full of people who are sensitive to threats, you wouldn't go into anyone's house ever. No. You wouldn't get anything done, because you'd be like, well, there's threats outside. Or if you had a team of people who are very kind of worried about threats, but then if you have a team of people who are, all of them are completely laissez-faire and just, there's never perform any sort of risk assessment, never kind of consider any risks, then again, you'll all be killed, kind of thing. Have that mix. And where does that balance sit? I don't know. And where does, even as you were saying before, things about, this is a situation in which you might draw your weapon, that would be really difficult, because what about all the edge cases, which I would say are pretty common? There'd be a lot of edge cases. And it's sort of one of those things, a bit like some areas of psychiatry where you cannot, there's just no right answer, no. There just is no right answer. It's like carrying firearms, performing ECT, ECT, electroshock therapy is needed and life-saving for some people, a very particular kind of conditions, but it has a horrible history of being terribly misused. Not intentionally, I think, but it does have a history of that. And so it's that kind of, there's always going to be people for and against, and saying you should go harder or you should go less hard, or it's a very kind of difficult.
It's so, and look, and on that, I think in my former professional career, generally speaking, I think I was better than not, and hope that most of my colleagues and the people I dealt with, both as victims and offenders, and everywhere in between, would validate that. But I made some terrible mistakes. Like I'm quite sure that there are that yeah, well, I don't want shouldn't say too, but like how do you like I've walked through the terrible mistakes that I've made that have caused massive damage to people's lives, again, without going into specifics. I'd imagine like you carry a heavier burden than I did in the police. What do you do? Like, you know, and there must have been times where you look back on jobs and go, oh man, I kind of stuffed that up. Like, you know, how do you self-care? How do you get through that? Because that's such a heavy burden.
Yeah, good question. We've got I guess at the time I always try to make the decision that I think is the right one for that, you know, for that place, for that person, for that time. And I try to, I guess it's in psychiatry, I kind of have the, I guess, luxury of being able to sit back and think, okay, if I don't know what to do straight away, I need to sit down, have a read, have a think, talk with my colleagues, and sort of, you know. But despite doing everything that you think is right and is the way to do something and is the way to help the person, for example, you do sometimes get bad outcomes. And I guess that's where we have professional supervision. So like at least once a month, I sit down with other psychiatrists and we talk in a, you know, a confidential space.
Safe space, yeah.
These sorts of things, yeah. And we talk through, like, you know, I don't know, you know, because sometimes it'll be you're still seeing somebody and you don't really know if it's going well. You're not really that sure if it's going well. And sometimes it seems sometimes it's obvious if it's going well or if it's not going well. But sometimes it's not that obvious. And sometimes, you know, things will get worse before they get better, or they will get better before they get worse and then better and then worse and then better, you know. So it's sometimes really hard to even know, have I even, I mean, like, I guess like a lot of people, I do, you know, have a bit of the old imposter syndrome, and also sometimes sit in the evening and think, oh, geez, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, geez, why did I do that? Why did I say that? But I guess it's all part of growing.
I think of a lot of the self-destructive people that I knew in the police. Some of them, incidentally, in uniform. So, you know, some poor coppers that were just that burnout and nihilistic. I knew so many. I could think of so many examples off the top of my head where people were literally punishing themselves, whether they've done something, you know, bad, and they deserved punishment. So they were constantly putting themselves in positions where their life was getting worse and worse and worse, and they knew, and they were doing it on purpose. That's what they wanted. Like, it's just how you can't bring someone back from that. Yeah. And you can give them the lithium, you can give them this, you know, you can give them the everything else, you know, you can give them the, but unless that person sort of like goes, you know what, they got to, I mean, ultimately, it's actually religious. They've actually got to forgive themselves. They've got to forgive themselves. You know what? I'm going to cut you a break this time. You're only human. I'm going to go easy on you. Yeah. Treat you like a person that is worthy of forgiveness. And the person does that with themselves. There's nothing you can do. Like, oh God, just.
I guess particularly things like the police force, where people go into it because A, they want to help people, and B, because they're good at, you know, recognizing and following procedures. Those people are probably going to be more prone when there's a bad outcome to maybe blame themselves, or to think like, that's the whole reason I got into this, and I can't even do that.
Because they're duty types, and it's the self-image. So if they go up, like, because I was a peer support officer for a little while, and like everybody, you know, you go in thinking, oh, you know, you're seeing all the dead bodies and, you know, the human trauma and blah, 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 and it affects you. And yeah, it does. Like everybody has different resilience levels with that. Like, and just how resilient you are, like sooner or later, you're going to go to too many dead bodies. But that's actually not the big That's not the thing that burns out coppers and stuffs them up. What stuffs them up is when they go, and I'm pretty sure, because I did read, so like I'm not familiar with all the literature, but I do remember specifically reading some literature about this. And what it is a copper will go to a situation, they'll stuff something up, or they'll feel that they stuffed something up, or they did everything right and the outcome was bad, or there was some sort of bad outcome there. And because they're duty types and they hold themselves to this really, really high thing, it's like self-blame and the recrimination doesn't stop. And that's the PTSD, because they've done something wrong and they just cannot stop playing that over in their heads. They just cannot, and they just will not stop blaming themselves, and they will bear that responsibility constantly. Well, I've seen it in civilians too. Like I saw this, this one lady that I was trying really hard to. It was in the last couple of months of my career, and yeah, she something really traumatic happened to her, and she blamed herself for it, and it really wasn't all. It was one of those things where she did contribute to it, but it wasn't her fault, without going into specific details. And as a consequence, she specifically started. It wasn't like I'm taking drugs to numb the pain. Like when I was talking to her, she goes, yeah, that's part of it. But I go and do stupid stuff and I hang out with bad people and I'm hoping that I'll get killed. Like that's what I want. And when I wake up and I've been flogged or whatever it is, I deserve it. I deserve this, Matt. Like I'm sitting there because it's amazing. I mean, what I've heard is nothing compared to you. But if you sit there and genuinely listen to people, like no kidding, sit there and genuinely focus on that person, it's amazing what people will tell you. Amazing. They will tell you their deepest, darkest secrets. If they think that you're a person, if they trust you, and if they think that you're, the person that's well-intentioned, and most of them can pick it, Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, but most people can kind of like pick. Human beings are really good at picking intentions in other people, generally speaking.
Yes,
they'll know.
I noticed that actually while you were saying that, you've got one of those faces where people would just probably come up to you and just start, it's that classic like, hey, like, and just, tell you their life story within 5 minutes kind of thing. And also like you've got a good manner in terms of your non-judgment, you come across as non-judgmental, as trustworthy, interested, and it's those sorts of things that can be, I mean, that kind of thing can make all the difference. That kind of thing can make more difference than any kind of psychiatrist for certain conditions. Honestly, just being understood is that's kind of all there is to it.
And that's what they wanted, and especially because they see you as a person in a position of authority and respect. They've got to have that makes sense. It's like, dude, you don't know me. It's like, really? You didn't see me face down in the backyard with that rum bottle under my arm, did you? No, you didn't. But it's kind of. But yeah, no, and all they wanted to do, and they didn't even expect you. This is the thing that really astounded me. Like, and it did. Like early in my career, you're kind of right. Actually, I've never really thought about that because I wondered why are all these people telling me these things. And it's kind of like, and then I just normalized it. It's like, oh yeah, that's what human beings do, and it's because I'm in the police and I hold this office and stuff like that. And obviously that's got a fair bit to do with it. But then I started to realize that they didn't even expect you because. Initially, I went through that stage in my career. Well, you got to solve the problem. It's like, no, you can't solve. You can't do that. It's that person's problem. They own that problem. And sometimes, like that problem, they've actually fallen in love with the problem, and that problem's dominant is actually their god. It's their center. It's the idol that they worship, and that's
or they can't imagine themselves. It's too scary to think of changing. So even though they might know that like this is a bad situation, I'm on a bad track here, but change, that would be terrifying. Change is kind of one of the most terrifying things on the planet for a lot of people.
I'm comfortable in my shithole.
It's warm at least.
But people will tell you, and they didn't even expect you to solve the problem a lot of the times. They just wanted you to that's it. And I found that both astounding, but the other thing I found, Dan, is like, mate, that's sad. Like, you think of the implications for that. Well, when you start to think about that, it's like, that means that we live in this incredible society, and yeah, we're more connected than we ever were. And, you know, we have the capacity, but there are so many disconnected, genuinely no bullshit, so lonely people out there. And they're surrounded by people, but they are so lonely.
Yeah.
So isolated. And dude, that was, I found that kind of sad, to be honest. Like you see a lot of that too, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it underpins that's a commonality. I think it underpins mental illness, and it underpins certain kinds of crime. That just being disconnected from others and having conform to society's rules. Sorry, what did society do for me? I'm not too sure. I can't. I have no buy-in. I've got nothing. Society already kind of doesn't really think much of me, and doesn't really seem to be offering me much. Why would I be interested in conforming, and how can I be expected to be happy or calm about this situation when everybody else seems to be a piece of the puzzle and I'm like an extra printed piece from maybe another puzzle? It feels like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you kind of like you can understand you can understand why. Sorry, we've been talking for so long with you. Also, I should have had the water.
No.
But you can understand why, you lucky devil. Yeah, with your beer. You can understand why. Oh, it's water. Sometimes you
it's water here. Beer's over there, yeah.
But like, I can understand too why, and I don't approve, and you'd always try and, you know, talk people out of it. That's the wrong, but, you know, try and point out an alternative viewpoint. You can understand why people get nihilistic. Like, even in these great times, and we live in a fantastic society, your needs are taken care of. You got no excuse, in inverted commas, but sometimes you do. I don't approve, but I get it. Like, I get why people get nihilistic. I genuinely do. Like, you know, trying to explain to someone that despite everything that they see and everything they experience, and like, yeah, you really are treated like shit. And yeah, you kind of like really do actually have a cognitive brain disorder as well from when you were hit in the head or whatever it is. And your parents treated you like shit and they didn't like you. You know, your mum was a bitch or whatever it is. Yeah, true. All of that shit is true. Like, how can you kind of like, you know, you understand why a person would devalue themselves when that's all they've experienced. You totally get it. And to try and get,
the programs have been written in there and they're just being run every time one gets play pressed on it. And is where you get things, you know, even in psychiatry or psychology, like behavioral activation, where, you know, the first thing is to do things, and doing things can improve your motivation, rather than if some people say, I'll start doing things once I feel motivated. Well, you may not feel motivated until you start doing things, and in that way what you're doing will change. And what it changes is not, I mean, maybe it does make some physical changes, but the big thing that doing things changes is your belief that you can do things. Because that often is what paralyzes people and, you know, causes procrastination or causes people to avoid things, is this belief that, well, I can't do it and I'll just fail, or I'll succeed and then that will lead to problems somehow, or I just straight up won't be able to do it, and therefore if I don't try, then my record is still 100%, I guess. Whereas if I try and fail, then I might somehow, you know, there might be some terrible psychological consequences for me, or, you know, so then the doing of the thing is what helps people to believe that they can do the thing in future. Not always. Like, everything with a grain of salt and nothing.
Absolutely. With certain qualifications, But I mean, you see that in great sports players that every now and then they'll throw a match.
Right. Yeah.
It's